All right, Unit 13 into the 1980s, resurgence of conservatism. Here come the Republicans pushing back against the liberalism and the liberal movements of the 60s and the 70s, trying to fix the economic problems, fix and respond to the lack of response from their argument mindset to the push of communism in the late 70s, 1979. Here we go. Ronald Reagan. Why people love him? They love him because he spoke very commonly to the common people. He had a way of communicating. In fact, he will be the great communicator, one of his nicknames. He is going to lead a movement that has been building here to reduce the power of Washington and restore the nation's optimism in the wake of the pessimistic 1970s, Vietnam, the energy crisis, and, of course, liberal legislation and a liberal shift in society that was offensive to the conservative element of the country. Election 1980, Carter's running for re-election with his vice president, Walter Mondale, Minnesota guy. President Jimmy Carter, again, is one of those Sun Belt candidates, and some of the things that are problematic for him: inflation from the 1970s, bad economy, invasion of Afghanistan, the Iran hostage crisis is especially damaging. There are even more things we'll talk about here that are a problem for him that are going to really hurt him in this re-election bid. Another Sun Belt candidate, Ronald Reagan, a leading spokesman for American conservatism and the conservative movement, ran for the candidacy for the Republican Party back in the late 60s, was a Hollywood actor, very well known, head of the Screen Actors Guild, the Union for Screen Actors in the 1950s, and outspoken against communism in the campaign. We're going to reduce spending and taxes, shift power from the federal government to the states. You're going to notice there's a strong theme here in the 80s that we saw previously in the 1920s. Traditional American values, family, religion, hard work, patriotism, condemning the Soviets for their aggression, vowing a military buildup to respond and stand up to them. And again, inflation in the economy is very damaging here to the Carter administration, still plaguing the country in double-digit numbers. Definitely a factor in that Iran hostage crisis is going to go right down to the wire to when the new oath of office is going to be given to Reagan in 1981. Economically, the method of dealing with the nation's economic problems is going to be, as we saw with the 1920s in Andrew Mellon and the Republican administrations in the 1920s, supply-side economics, pump up the supply of money. We're going to get rid of and attack these huge deficits by doing this. The national debt is very large during this time. Think cost of the Vietnam War, think expenses of the Great Society programs, going to push significant tax cuts, and with those tax cuts, then that money is going to be put elsewhere in the economy, into jobs, growth in industry and business, and that money is then going to trickle down into the people, the populace, the middle class, to develop jobs, and everybody's going to be much happier. In 1972, and it had a number of years where it had a window of time where it had to be passed by 3/4 of the states in order to become a new constitutional law. By the time it gets to the year 1982, it timed out, and not enough states ratified it. This movement is, again, a push against that. But it kind of dies because of the fact that we have conservative women pushing against some of this movement as well, and this amendment that kind of helps cause it to fail. And so it is dead and gone, not around, and maybe someday later. Theme number 2, Cold War. This is what really Ronald Reagan is especially known for. Tough policies against communism, but will, in the process of working against communism, will actually grow very close to the leader that we're going to highlight here, Mikhail Gorbachev, who is going to be also very much a key component to the end of the Cold War and the falling apart of the Soviet Union. So within the Cold War and the Reagan administration and the Reagan years, there's really a strong, harsh talk against communism and words of force being used if necessary. The 1979 Soviet Union invasion of Afghanistan is especially the trigger point here, and there'll be a significant rise in spending, in military spending, to try and confront this aggression. Massive increases in defense to deal with the aggression. You can see how it compares to previous wars and previous time periods. In the Cold War time period, it definitely is a spike, and in order to show that we are serious about keeping communism where it is, we have to have something to back it up, and that is part of the philosophy. There is, in a sense here, a return to the brinkmanship and the mad kind of this concept of the 1950s under the Eisenhower administration, being willing to push it to the edge, forces what the communist world understands. In 1983, Reagan gives a speech called the Evil Empire speech, and basically highlights a doctrine that says we will use force if anybody threatens our access to oil here, and that was seen as a direct threat to our access to oil. And with that war, and with Americans and Westerners coming into Saudi Arabia, non-believers, unbelievers, it's going to create a radical element and some animosity amongst some of the people in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East for Westerners having this presence here. They don't like it, they don't want it. So the war is going to be one. It's one, of course, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's going to generate this Osama bin Laden guy, who is kind of, in terms of putting it into on a level that we're maybe familiar with, he'd from a family that was on the wealth level of the Rockefellers in American history. And he had some significant money to work with. He's going to be going to Afghanistan, and he's going to be developing this organization to try and push the West and their influence out of the Middle East and out of Muslim affairs in the Muslim world. Some things you've talked about and studied about here in terms of issues and pushing issues and events that come up during the Reagan administration, El Salvador, the war in Nicaragua was going on there pre-1980 and pre-Ronald Reagan. There was a civil war that had raged there since the 1960s. The Sandinista pro-communist regime wins that war in 1981. Ronald Reagan starts sending military advisors and resources and things to help prop up the anti-communist Contras to oppose that regime. However, during that time, it kind of came out that the Contras were doing things that were very, very inhumane and not nice, sending out death squads to kill people and things like that. Gets out in public, and the Soviet Union is looking like this, and it's going to turn into this. All these fringe satellite countries are going to fall and break away to just Russia. However, to the present day, and what's established or develops in its place is something called the Commonwealth, pardon the spelling up here, of independent states in 1991, and basically it's kind of like NATO in a way, kind of like the EU, European Union in a way, where they pledge and have this set of economic cooperative treaties and connections and relationships, collective security. There's 9 member states to this present day, and usually somebody from Russia is kind of at the head and the lead of it. And so those countries essentially are, as you can kind of see here in the map, independent. However, again, Crimea recently was annexed in the last couple of years by the Russians in the last year or so.